Welcome to Django for SaaS. I'm Kostya and we are about to create and deploy your first Django project. In this video, we'll start a fresh Django project from scratch, add all necessary configuration to settings.py, Dockerize your project, add a custom user model, and finally we'll deploy your project to a VPS using Appliku. In order to follow this tutorial, you will need some software installed on your computer. Python, code editor, I use PyCharm, and Docker Desktop. First, we'll create a fresh Django project. Open a terminal, create a directory for the project, and switch to it. Within this directory, create a Python virtual environment and activate it. First update pip, the package manager, then install Django. Now we'll create a Django project in the current directory. Pay attention to that dot at the end of the command. It's important. Apply migrations and start the development server. Now open the URL in the browser. It works. Now we need to modify settings file. We need to make the project to respect environment variables for a few key settings. You should not hardcode sensitive information like database credentials or a secret key. Instead, they should be passed as environment variables. If credentials change, you won't have to update the code. Just update the environment variables and restart the app. It's more secure and way more convenient. Open the project in your code editor. Create a new file, requirements.txt. Add these four packages: Django, library for reading data from environment variables, Gunicorn, and Postgres client package. Also, we need to pin exact versions of each of these packages. To do this, we will go to PyAPI and check the current version of each package, and write it to the requirements.txt file. Let's run pip install to make sure that we got packages versions right. Back to the editor, open settings.py file. We need to replace hard-coded values with calls to Django environment functions. There are a number of methods available, each made to parse data from os.environ and cast to some useful Python type variables. We are going to define three settings variables: debug, which is Boolean, allowed hosts, which is a list of strings, and database URL, which will convert a credential database URL into a Python object. Additionally, we enable atomic requests and connection max age, which will have a default of 60 seconds. Specifying the default value makes environment variable optional. Secure proxy SSL header setting will help Django understand if it's running behind an SSL proxy, and login configuration to send all logs into standard output. Lastly, clean up all existing definitions of settings which we have just created. The environment on your computer is different from the server where your application will be published. Because of these differences, your application might behave differently between your computer and the server. Dockerizing an application means packaging the app itself along with all the dependencies and configurations. By running your app in Docker, you make sure that app runs in the same environment, both locally during development and when deployed on the server. This might sound a bit complex, but in a moment you will see that setting it up is not hard at all. To run a project in Docker, we need to make two files, Dockerfile and dockercompose.yml. Dockerfile describes how the OS image should look like and what packages are installed in the system. Building an image from a Docker file creates a snapshot of such system. Every line in Dockerfile makes a so-called image layer. Subsequent lines will start with the layer made by the previous command. First line, from keyword, points to the base image for our Docker file. In this case, Python 3.11, based on Debian Bullseye release. Let's pin the exact version to avoid any surprises with builds when the newer version gets released and build breaks. And lines set environment variables for the subsequent commands. Run will execute a command and all the changes to the file system will be saved in the resulting layer. Note that environment variables set with export command will not persist. Use env for that. This Docker file sets some envvars, installs additional Debian packages, installs project dependencies, and copies the rest of the project files. You can pause the video to read the detailed explanation. Docker Compose YML describes all the processes needed to run application, volumes, networks, and environment variables. Here we define two services. Database, which will run image Postgres 15, the second service will run Django development server. It will use envvars from .env file, expose the port of the app on your host machine, and current directory mounted as a volume. Mounting the volume makes changes to the project files on your computer available in container without rebuilding the image. .env file, which is referenced in Docker Compose YML, will be used to populate environment variables in the container, and Django will pick up these values in settings.py. Because we will be using Postgres in Docker, we don't need SQLite database file, so delete it. The command docker compose app tells Docker to spin up all services defined in Docker Compose YML. It will download the images and build the local ones if needed. The build failed because I've made a typo in one of the Debian packages. Let's fix it and try again. You can see logs from all services here, Postgres and web in our case. Since our database is empty, we need to run migrations again. Let's apply migrations, but remember we need to run it within Docker now. Let's open it again in the browser. And it works. Django comes with its own built-in user model. If you want to make any changes to it, like use email instead of username or add fields, you need to create your own model. The tricky part is that you have to do it at the start of the project, because changing it in the mid-project when you have a database full of data is so tricky that let's say it's close to impossible. Let's start a Django app that will contain our custom user model. Remember that we need to run manage.py commands within Docker container. In the new user model app, create a file called managers.py. In model.py, we define our custom user model. We need to declare all fields for the custom user model here. I prefer to make user ID non-numerical field, but instead UUID field. Email field will be case insensitive and unique. Here we make use of our custom manager we defined earlier. Username field contains name of the field on the user model that is used as the unique identifier. Now include user model app into installed apps. And set auth user model setting to our new custom user model. In the admin.py file, we need to define the model admin and register the custom user model. Make migrations for our user model app. Press Ctrl D to stop the container shell. Back to the first shell, press Ctrl C to stop Docker Compose. Docker Compose down -v will tear down the app including volumes. Next time we spin up the app, our database will be clean. Run Docker Compose app again. In the second terminal tab, run a shell in container and apply migrations. Now we need a way to create a superuser, and I will show you a very convenient way, which will also fully automate creation of superuser when we deploy the app. Within the user model app, create a Python package called management. Within management package, create the commands package. And within commands package, create a file called makesuperuser.py. This creates a command that we can run with Python manage_py make superuser. It will check if superuser exists, and if not, create one with a random password and print login credentials. If a superuser already exists, it will not do anything. This allows running it after every deployment, but only one user will be created. Run this command in the container shell. Copy email and password and try to log in into the Django admin site. The user model app and its user model are picked up by the admin site. Remember the lengthy admin.py file? The form set and other parameters defined there give us this interface for editing users. In order to deploy our project, it must be hosted as Git repository. We will use GitHub to host our repo. Go to terminal, exit the container shell with Ctrl-D. Run git init to initialize Git repository. Create .gitignore file to prevent unwanted files to get included in Git. Back to the terminal. Make sure Git status doesn't show anything we don't want to be included. Run git add command to add all files and git commit. Now go to github.com, sign up if you haven't already, and create a repository. Select and copy git remote add command and paste and run it in terminal. Now push your master branch to GitHub. Refresh the repo page in browser to see all your files there. In order to run the project with Appliku, create a file called procfile. In this file, list commands needed to run the project. The web is a special process that will respond to HTTP requests. Release is a command that will run on every new deployment. I recommend having a release script to include multiple commands. In this example, apply migrations and make superuser command. Add, commit, and push new changes. Now it's time for the most exciting part. We will deploy the project. To do that, you need two things: a Hetzner Cloud account and Appliku account. Hetzner is a great cloud provider with very good prices. Appliku is a deployment service designed specifically for Django. In Appliku dashboard, go to Servers, Add Server, Custom. Copy the public key. Now go to Hetzner Cloud dashboard and add a server. Select region Falkenstein, Ubuntu 22.04 and shared CPU IRM64. Add SSH key that you have copied from Appliku dashboard. Give server a name. Double check everything and click Create and Buy Server. Server should be ready shortly. Wait for the green dot on the left near the server name. Back in Appliku dashboard, paste the IP address of the new server and click Check Credentials and Add Server. I did it too fast. Server wasn't ready yet. It's okay to try several times until it works. Now server is added to your team and setup process will begin shortly. Server setup process takes around 5 to 10 minutes. When server is ready, you will be notified via email. Setup is finished and we can create an application. Go to Applications, click Add Application button and choose GitHub. Give your application a name, select Repository, pick a branch and the server, and click Create Application button. You will see the application overview page. Click Add Database, select Postgres 15 as server and click Create Database. Wait until it is deployed. In the bottom right corner, click Settings, then click on Environment Variables tab. Click Add button. Add two environment variables, Django allowed hosts and Django secret key. Database URL has already been added automatically from the database we created. Click Save and Deploy and the first deployment will begin. Unfortunately, the first deployment has failed. The reason is we didn't take care of static settings. By default, Django doesn't serve static files. To serve static files with Django, we will use the white noise library. Add white noise to requirements file. Rebuild the Docker image. In Settings Py, configure static root. Add white noise to the right place in middleware. and 2 more white noise settings primarily useful during development. Now let's add our correct Python interpreter to PyCharm so that autocomplete and other features work. And again, commit and push changes to GitHub. Push new changes to repository triggers deployment automatically. This time everything worked, migrations were applied, and superuser has been created. Go to Application Overview page, click on View Application. We haven't created any views, that's why you will see Not Found error. Let's go to Admin and use those login credentials from deployment log to log in to the admin side. And it worked just like it worked on local machine. This concludes our tutorial. I hope it was interesting. Don't forget to subscribe.